Hello everyone, welcome in. This is section 2.4, understanding the different degrees and application of stylization, in OKKU's Coloso class, how to design stylish and trendy characters for illustrations. And then as always, you guys can follow along with further class lecture reviews for this course by subscribing and following along on the playlist. But jumping right into today, this was a very visually based class. So if you're following along on Coloso itself and you own the course, this would be very helpful to watch along. So a lot of this stuff might be a little bit confusing to understand without context, but hopefully it'll make more sense when I add in visual guides for my own homework that I'll add in here once I do that. But in any case, diving into the notes, she kind of goes over stylization, which she mainly segments into 5 parts for majority of the styles we're going to be working with, which that's going to be from most realistic to most stylistic, which obviously most realistic is going to be straight realism, followed by semi-realism, anime style, stylized, which is kind of a mix of proportions between anime style and chibi, and then just straight chibi. Semi-realism is a common art style for games, and semi-realism and anime style are typically experimented with and mixed for different styles and different aspects, and that's normally where most people will begin working with a lot of their professional portfolio who are interested in anime style illustrations. And then just some more tips off of stylization itself. Hair acts as a supporting element to character design, so do keep in mind it's important to consider it carefully and how it affects the face. Study games and media for references on style as well. She mentions that Nendoroid is really good reference for chibi or for those who are interested in drawing it. And then details are generally simplified when more style is applied. And this is part of the visual aspect of this class. She shows and she draws hair over each figure from realism to chibi. And you can notice in each of the figures, the hair details and the strands actually begin becoming more cohesive and in singular units. So it's easier to group the hair together as you add more and more style in. Semi-realism and realism are very similar except for proportions, as the proportion of facial features moves horizontally apart and vertically closer as style is applied. So you'll notice this if you compare human proportions to anime style proportions, and we kind of go over this in the past 2 classes as well when we went over proportions in figure drawing. But as you apply more style, the horizontal proportions of your faces and their facial features are going to get wider, and the vertical proportions are going to become shorter. So if you notice in chibi, it's very big eyes that take up a large portion of the face, and the mouth, which is almost directly below it, with a huge forehead. And then obviously compared to realism, where a lot of the facial features are more balanced out, and you have a more cohesive figure that's balanced in nature. You can actually draw the profile that these faces create by creating a triangle between the mouth and the 2 eyes. You'll notice that triangle slowly changing shape, getting wider and getting shorter on the bottom as style is applied to each face. So that's just a good offhanded tip that she really recommends that'll help you kind of nail down where your style is fitting between realism and stylistic choice. And then just some more quick tips. Hair can be separated by applying color or darkening / using lights and stylistic ways for emphasis. You often see this in anime style illustrations where single color characters with the same uniform hairstyle will generally have darkened hair in the back, or have even just an entirely different color that's used as a gradient on the back end to show a shadow and give it a little bit more dynamic feeling for the lighting on the hair. You can pick your preferred style through consideration of the field and work that'd be focused on. So for most people drawing in anime style illustrations, they're generally going to prefer everything from semi-realism to chibi, and most likely semi-realism and anime style focus, because those proportions are a lot more balanced to the human figure. And then shading is generally the same for the figure from realism to anime style, so most of your shading for what you're going to shade with in shadow is going to be relatively the same between realism and anime style, and that's just because a lot of the human proportions are mainly kept until you start really pushing into stylized and chibi, where they're just completely distorted. Because of that, your shading is going to be relatively similar. Then after considering stylization, she goes into tips for drawing at different angles and how to sort of set that up, and some good tips and tricks to keep in mind as you begin to do so. So these are all being considered as well in the semi-realism style. These will obviously change depending on what style you're working in, but these are a good basis to work with to start. So for the front angle, eyes are going to be the midpoint of the figure box head that you draw, which is just going to be the box that sort of frames the skull on top of the character. The nose from there is going to be halfway between the eyes and the chin, and then the mouth is going to be halfway between the nose and the chin itself. And going back to this figure box head point, on a side profile, the jawline will actually start at the midpoint between the front and the back side of the head, and the side profile is going to be longer than the front profile. And that's why it's sort of a figure box head and not necessarily a cube, because the side profile of the skull is actually going to look longer than the front face in order to give it more reasonable proportions for the style. And then for a low angle perspective, you're going to draw the midpoint of the front profile and perspective, and then draw the eyes on the line, which is generally considered straight, that you draw, with the pupils also being drawn in perspective as well in order to get an accurate gaze of the character. Depending on the angle, since the front profile of the face moves inwards from the nose down, the mouth will actually be off-center from the midpoint in the front profile, and the lips will generally be shown higher on the face due to perspective. So keep this in mind. The figure box head is really good for placing the anatomical pieces of the face, but you will have to play with them depending on the perspective and what you're working with. And then for high angle perspective, you're going to do the same thing where you draw the midpoint on the front profile in perspective, and then draw the eyes on the line where the pupils are also in perspective and at a proper angle for a correct gaze of the character. But keep in mind, and this goes for low angle perspective, but you generally see this more in high angle perspectives, but you'll work with both, that the ends of the eyes in an off-center perspective will actually angle slightly around the natural bend of the face. So especially if you deal with characters that are closer and closer to a side profile, you might have to deal with this sort of eye bending around the curve of the face, which is just natural, and it's just something you're gonna have to account for more as you steer away from directly just front profile drawings. And then just some things on high angle perspective as well. The distance between eyebrow and eyes are shortened due to the perspective, and the jaw is going to be pushed in, with the bridge of the nose shown more dominantly, because you have a little bit more of the top view of the nose rather than a front or bottom view. And the nose and mouth are going to be closer together because of that top view as well. So really, when adding stylization, remember the proportions of facial features, as well as that the jawline shrinks and is less pronounced, the neck is thinner, and the features of the face come closer together as you add more style to your character. And then since the forehead gets bigger with more stylization, different styles and aesthetic design choices will look better with each style. So OKKU really uses front bangs as an example because they look better with stylization, which hide a lot more of that sort of more alien forehead that you get as you add more stylization to a character, while more mature design choices will generally fit more mature styles closer to realism. So OKKU mentions that front bangs she generally tends to avoid unless specifically for a design choice on realistic characters, because front bangs generally have a more childish look to them, and it just kind of contrasts the mature nature of realism. So as a quick summary to all this, understand the fundamental changes that occur in drawing characters as stylization is added to said character. Changing various elements tastefully of stylism and realism will create an individual style for yourself. And then the proportions of a character's face grow shorter and wider as stylization is applied, meaning that design choices should be considered accordingly depending on what your character eventually ends up along that spectrum. And then the self-assigned homework that I thought was appropriate is to create a left, centered, and right angled portrait of a character in a centered, low angle, and high angle perspective, and feel free to experiment with style and proportions as each face is drawn. So this will actually end up as a 9-face figure, and I'll show some examples up here of what I mean. This will help really nail down facial proportions at different angles and perspectives. So that was 2.4 of OKKU's class. Hopefully this helped for those who were watching, and thank you so much for joining. You can always keep up to date with any of my other content that I upload that's coming soon, as well as any updates to further class/lecture reviews. I'll have links to all my socials around here on the screen for you guys to check out if you guys are interested. Again, thank you so much for joining the lecture review today, and as always, I hope to see you in the next lecture review coming soon in the future. Take it easy, have a good one.